cite this idea of empire mindset of building almost like a Christian empire. And this is challenging many of the ideologies we see today, even the Christian nationalism idea. While they would not like the idea of empire per se, but they would dominion. And I mean, you've even seen that. Tom Holland has drawn attention to that with his book, Dominion. And in the Christian Manifesto, or the Christian Nationalist Manifesto that has been now kind of distributed and gaining some ground, popularized by Douglas Wilson and others, there is this idea that we are to take dominion over the world today. And what has happened, though, is it's created more of a subculture of cultural, I mean, I don't want to say superiority ideology, but this idea of empire. So bring this out for us. I'm not explaining it very well, but bring that out so we can understand.
Yeah, so this chapter is different from the others in the sense that all of the others are, they're centered on ideas or concepts that are essentially good but can be distorted. And I think empire is one that really is more negative in the way that it's played out. And so again, to go back to the Victorian Age was a time in which England said, the sun never set on the British Empire, and it did. And so the thing that I bring out in there is how the evangelical movement, which arose alongside the British Empire, the one that people thought the sun would never set on, is also, we can't separate what the growth of evangelicalism and the missions efforts that it promoted, how we can't separate that from the growth of empire. And so at a time when the British Empire covered 1/4 of the globe and missions was being done, the spread of the gospel was being done in the name of the gospel, but also in the name of empire. I mean, that's just a historical fact that we can't ignore. And so I'm just trying to tease out and say, well, let's just look at this history and look at and see how has this pairing influenced us today. I mean, and I talk very literally about empire and center that chapter on the very popular poem by Rudyard Kipling called The White Man's Burden, which just basically articulates that it's actually the burden and the responsibility of white people to go colonize other nations. And that's an underlying assumption. We might say that we don't believe that anymore, or we might not put it in the words or just use the words that he uses in that poem, but it's still part of our history, and it's not even ancient history. I mean, this is not much more than a century ago. So this is still very deeply rooted. And I just try to show how, well, we might not do that anymore, but we still, we have something called the evangelical industrial complex, which is about building empires, whether it's mega churches or publishing empires. We're very much in evangelicalism about empire building. And I would argue that it's really just a semantic thing to say that the empire building is somehow different from dominion. I mean, they are different, but I think it's all it stems from the same kind of thinking.
Well, that's that colonialist mindset that's been there. And then I know I had Scott Sundquist on, and he wrote The Shape of History, and in it and I also had Gene Green, and Gene Green was basically just lamenting colonialization and the harmful effects. And of course, Scott does too, but Scott also noticed that there were some really genuine believers that really did want to see the propagation of the Christian faith, but found that, again, this is where we get the mixed bag. Nothing is ever perfect in what we go about, and everything has consequences, and we're never going to be able to figure everything out. But we should stop and think about some of the cultural assumptions that are there that have shaped us in the modern time, because they have shaped largely what the Christian faith looks like. And as it's been said, or some have actually hypothesized, if Jesus were to come into our modern evangelical churches, would he recognize it? And I think that's a legitimate question. I think that's something that should cause us all to stop and reflect and go, okay, what does that mean? I mean, and as D.L. Moody said, even God can make a straight line with a crooked stick. We can do things imperfectly. And Paul says, I know in part and prophesy in part. And And he also says, I even if it's been a mixed motive for how the gospel was preached, at least it was preached. And some people say, well, then the end justifies the means. But we're also saying, well, yeah, but there are times and opportunities that we need to go back and check the means, because that carries meaning and long-term repercussions for the people that we interact with day in, day out. And that's why
I would just want to throw in there. I mean, I didn't say it's just basic humility, right? We know theologically, we insist, we are fallen, we are finite, we are human, we are depraved, all of those things. And so if we accept all those things, then basic humility says, we're going to accept that we're doing things wrongly, and those errors are going to change, throughout time and situation and people. And so like we just look at them and say, oh, how are we getting this wrong? It's as simple and as hard as that, I guess.
But this one gets much more complex. And you hit this. Actually, you hit my guy, D.L. Moody. It was a hard one. You're not the first person to say that, but you basically said Moody in some ways is the father of bringing in modern business methods into evangelicalism. And then you trace him down a little bit, hit Billy Graham even. And I know people are saying, well, how dare you criticize Billy Graham? I mean, we're looking at the methodologies that have been employed in the dissemination of the gospel, and we're asking, were there unrecognized consequences for the methodologies that have been employed? That's what we're talking about.
That's all. Yeah, I mean, I grew up, just thinking Billy Graham was the gospel, like everything was gospel, and he was, practically perfect in every way. And so for me, I'm just saying, I didn't realize that Billy Graham, said this in this context, or had this particular influence on this rhetoric in world politics. So it's just me discovering, like, there's a context for this. What is the context, and what maybe is not rooted in the gospel, and what is what can we learn from that? I mean, that's just that's what my attempt is here, is to just take the things that I sort of naively accepted as perfect and completely representative of Christianity and evangelicalism, and say, oh wait, there was this, and I'm sure people will do that for me someday, or for this time. So yeah.
And we have that luxury of not. I mean, of course, we're looking back on history to people that can't defend themselves and talk about it, and it's also part of the time that we're in. There are certain things that we all look back and we go, well, you don't understand the time. At the time it seemed right, and it was the dissemination of the gospel. Many people heard it, and what we're trying to say, for those that are just kind of jumping in and a little bit confused in what we're talking about, is employing business tactics and business mindsets that have been used to communicate the gospel that actually ends up treating people as a product rather than a person. Would you say that, or would you add to that? Would you disagree with that?
No, absolutely. Or even something more innocuous and nuanced is just saying that, for example, dressing a certain way is Christian, when no, dressing a certain way is actually just like a business attire. And don't confuse the two. Like if you're setting up an environment where you want a certain dress code or certain behaviors or whatever, say that this is why you have these rules or these behaviors, that this is the reason for them, and don't conflate them with the gospel or with the Christian faith, because that's what causes people to deconstruct. Is when they discover that this rule, this principle, which might be very good for some other reason, but it's not rooted to the gospel itself, or even a biblical rule. Like wearing a tie is not biblical, but it might be, part of a culture. So, I mean, I come from an environment where some of those rules were put in place, and I saw people confusing them, like to say that they are more Christian, like you should wear your hair a certain way, or not wear facial hair, or now you have to wear facial hair. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It just has to do with culture.